This is Tasneem Akulawala welcoming you to Vidarbh Literary Festival, arguably India's the largest literary festival in central India. We function on lines similar to other established literary festivals across the country, but with the difference that we have purely non-fiction authors in action here in Nagpur. Each year, we have a central theme to the festival. This year's theme is non-fiction for inclusion. And in line with this theme, we have various authors and topics that instill these values in us. Inclusion, to be included, to be provided equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded. Inclusion of minorities, marginalized sections of society, inclusion of the differently abled, inclusion of the privileged too. Willingness to accept books of each section included in this festival, the receptiveness of readers of Majha Nagpur to lend a ear to every marvelous author included. Readers are assured to be enthralled with a fantastic array of most intriguing non-fiction books wound so seamlessly in astounding narratives by an inclusive lineup of incredible authors. Second activity in this room today is a workshop by none other than Mr. Prem Panicker. I request our moderator, Ms. Neha Sinha, to usher Mr. Prem Panicker on the podium for the audience. Workshop in focus, Writing for a Distracted Age by our dynamic Mr. Prem Panicker. Prem Panicker is a consulting editor with India Spend, a journalist and editor with over 30 years of experience. He helped launch Rediff.com. My first email ID, sir, Rediff.com. India's first internet-only news site and has been editor of New York-based India Abroad, the news magazine of record for the influential Indian-American Committee. Mr. Prem Panicker was managing editor of Yahoo India till November 2014, after which he helped found the independent site peeply.org, which focuses on multimedia long-form storytelling on issues relating to water, climate change, the environment, wildlife, and man-animal conflict. A writing coach, he has two goals: to write a story he can be proud of and to create on web a community forum that will serve as a template and an exemplar both. Get ready to write, alert youngsters, get ready to write. I bring you Prem Panicker. Moderator for this undistracted workshop, Neha Sinha. Ms. Sinha's passion for wildlife is visible in every aspect of her career, whether it is an award-winning wildlife conservationist or an author penning books that make the wild into something wildly attractive. In her 2021 novel, Wild and Willful, Sinha exposes the life and tragedy that befalls animals in the wild, centering her narrative around 15 iconic Indian species like tigers and elephants. Ms. Sinha, who previously worked as an environmental journalist, jumped ship to conservation sciences by getting selected for a scholarship in the field at Oxford University. Amongst her many projects, the Amur Falcon campaign in Nagaland is a standout, as it is the biggest conservation success story of recent times. Ms. Sinha works with the Bombay Natural History Society and using her extensive knowledge has trained hundreds of people in the basics of biodiversity. She won the Wildlife Service Awards in 2017 for her immeasurable contribution in the field. Please welcome Ms. Sinha.
Thank you so much. I apologize if you've heard these introductions before, and thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to moderate this session. And when I was given a choice of what all I could moderate or who I could interact with, Prem was top of my list. Because before I was an author, I was a reader. And boy, did I read peeply.org, which Prem has helped found. And I really hope all of you look it up, peeply.org. It has wonderful long format pieces on issues that should be on the top of every news headline today, which is climate and water and wildlife and how we are living with the land. But I find in Prem's work that he also brings a kind of meditative quality at a time when we are living in so much noise, in so much information. It's almost like we're saturated with information, and it's almost like we're distracted by it. So that's the topic for today, which is writing in a distracted age. And my very first question to Prem will be, so today we have to compete with 15-second Instagram reels and, I don't know, 5-second TikTok videos and the video format, the podcast format. So in a sense, it seems like it's more noise than ever before, but perhaps it's also more choice than ever before. So how do you approach where we are today?
Before I get to your question, Neha, thanks to VLF for having me. It's a bit daunting to be called for a literary festival when I haven't written a book. It's even more, I'm very grateful to these spotlights shining in my face because I can't see any of you. But if there are authors here, please forgive me for talking about the art and craft of writing to people who have actually practiced the art and craft of writing. One of the commonsensical things that they teach in business school and make a lot of money out of is if you want to solve a problem, you first have to properly define the problem. We say writing in a distracted age, and the problem with that is we put the onus on the reader, and to an extent we infantilize the reader. We're saying that she's like a kid in a pram, picks up a toy, tosses it out because she's bored, picks up another toy, tosses it the other way. It's the reader's fault that she is not sticking with the author. It isn't actually, because look at it this way. If you go to a restaurant today and you ask for water, what happens? The first question is, sir, bottled or regular? So you say, okay, bottled. Sir, still or sparkling? I mean, even to get a glass of water these days, we have to fill out a questionnaire and all of that. That's the amount of, no, seriously, that's the amount of choice we have about every little thing. Now take books. Back when I was a kid and I was learning to love words, to love what words put together could do to influence thought. My parents were in the early stage of their career, and salaries were limited. They were both government employees. So when they made the monthly budget, there would actually be a negotiation. Maybe this time we won't go to Buhari's and have cutlet, we'll buy an extra book instead, that sort of thing. And they would go to this place called Moor Market in Chennai, which is famous, or was famous for second-hand books, miles of them. And on the first day of the month, they would come back with 4 or 5 books, whatever could be afforded. Now, the choice before me was a binary. Either don't read, or read what they've got. Until next month, I had no other choice. Which is how a boy at the age of 12 ended up reading Dostoevsky, for instance, and Tolstoy and Anton Chekhov and all that, because, I mean, what choice did I have? I need not necessarily have liked all of those books, or maybe I was too young for those books, but not reading was not an option. So you read all of these books. Today, in this little device, I have comfortably over 150 books that I'm still to read, and in the 2 days that I've been here, I bought another 4 books. So what that means is that I don't have to stick with a writer if the writer hasn't done his or her work properly. If it's boring, if there is no context, if she hasn't paid enough thought to building her argument or hypotheses or whatever it is, I'll just chuck that book aside and go for another one. And that is not the fault of the reader, it is not the distracted reader, but to be brutally frank, the marginally incompetent writer who is responsible for that lack of attention. So, I mean, there's a friend of mine, for instance, who's just released, to my mind at least, the best work of fiction by an Indian author in at least the last 12, 24 months, Nilanjana Roy's Black River. I know that for 6 years she's been working on that book. She has gone through 7 drafts, and by drafts I mean rewriting the entire thing from start to finish. That kind of effort is what pays off, and I think that needs to be said up front, that you really have to put in the hard yards. You no longer can afford to take the audience for granted.
Another aspect is that we get news from various sources today, and drawing on your experience as a journalist, what is the extra thing we need to put into the copy, to the piece, which tells the reader more than what they already know? So, for example, they know who won the match or what, who's forming the government by the time they open that piece. So, could you tell us a bit about what you think is that effort or that extra thing that needs to go into the piece?
Yeah, so the answer to this in a strange way stems from something that you said earlier. You said in the world of Instagram and of reels and all of that, we think that content has to be short and concise. The problem is that nothing exists in a vacuum. Everything has context, everything has nuance. We've reduced the art of journalism or the craft of journalism to sound bites. Aapko kaise laga? We've reduced our news headlines to who said what. Jaishankar said this, Rahul Gandhi said that. Somebody saying something is not news per se. If there is a context and a backstory to it, it's our business to bring that out. We're not giving the reader value for money, and the reader is turning away, and then the media holds seminars on why the media is no longer relevant. The media is no longer relevant because the media is not doing its work. That's about as simple as you can put it. What else do you need to give? Exactly the things that I was talking about. And you work in the field of not just writing, but in the field of wildlife, of conservation, etc. You must have come across dozens of ill-informed articles which reduce, say for instance, man-animal conflict to a very simple thing of the elephants are attacking us, they need to be destroyed or transported somewhere else or whatever. It's not that simple. We built houses and farms and coffee plantations and all that in lands that the elephants traditionally occupied. They have an institutional memory, they keep coming back to places, you know this. Yeah. So when we do that, they come to a place that they think is theirs, and conflict happens. Where is that in a lot of the writing today? It's just, oh, 2 people died, elephants have become a menace, they need to be things. So yeah, I think it is incumbent, particularly today, particularly in an age where everything has been reduced to sound bites, I think it's incumbent for the writer, for the reporter, for the journalist to dig deeper. A lot of our coverage today is what I would say is a mile wide and a millimeter deep. Just surface. Niche kuch hai hi nahi. And until you bring that in, you're not providing the reader with, again, we are taking the reader for granted. We think that this, sorry for the language, but this shit is what they want. It isn't. And I can see a lot of heads, thank you. I can see a lot of heads nodding along. You're all readers. Clearly you're dissatisfied. And clearly the media knows that you're dissatisfied because their circulation is falling, their reader interest is falling. But nobody seems to want to step up and say, okay, we have to do something about it. Neha brought up Peeply. We worked on a story on how in the heart of the Thar Desert, where you get 18 millimeters of rain in a year, compare that with the fact that in Kerala during the monsoon you get 18 millimeters in an hour. This 18 millimeters of rain that they get in a year, the people who live there know how to landscape the land because there is rock beneath it, so the water will not sink below a particular point. They create a landscape where all the water that flows in a wide area or falls in a wide area comes to this place and forms a lake. And believe it or not, they get enough water to sustain themselves in the deepest part of the Thar Desert for at least 8 months. By sustaining themselves, I mean their household needs, their hygiene needs, the needs of their cattle, because they have both sheep and camels, their agricultural needs. All of that, 18 millimeters of water. Now, how do you do this story? You can go there, you can see this lake, and you can say, oh, wow. Or you can do what my friend Aarti Kumar Rao did. She went in peak summer to see how they prepare the land. She went again just before the monsoon to see, as the rain is falling, how does it come to this place? How do they store it? How do they make sure that it is not polluted? She went again a little while later, after the rains had ebbed, to see how they use the water. And then she went again 8 months later to see what happens once this water starts to, really end its existence. You need that kind of effort. And she produced that, and that effort pays off. Yeah, you spend a lot of money. In this case, we spent it out of our pocket. But that caught the attention of a Pulitzer Prize winner called Paul Salopek, who then invited Aarti to be his walking partner when he was walking across India. It attracted the attention of National Geographic, which is now funding an Aarti Kumar Rao project on migration. Why are people migrating? What is happening to them? It does pay off. But you have to put in the hard yards first. It's not the other way around. Paisa do to main karunga. So, yeah.
So to summarize what you're saying, it is about the effort that goes into writing that copy. It's also about taking time with it.
Yeah.
And time is a precious resource. And this takes me to one of the favorite pieces of mine that you have written, which is PV Sindhu match with Naomi. And let me tell you, it's a cinematic piece, right? It's about a match. Not everybody loves sports, but if you read that piece, you'll come away with some kind of feeling for the sport. And you know how it is in the movies where you have one scene and then you have the next scene and there's some kind of memory you have of the previous scene. It's like a narrative that's visual. So when I read this piece, which I will ask you to read from, it's almost cinematic in how visual it is. So as I said, if you're trying to write for a distracted age and your audience already knows the outcome, that is who won the match, or who's forming the government, or whether the elephant survived or the man survived, that it takes a kind of skill to be able to bring that out. And when I read this piece, even though I knew who had won the match, I felt like almost it was like watching a movie, because it's ball shot by shot. Can I ask you to read a bit from that piece and tell us a bit about how you wrote it? It's very unusual in mainstream media for a piece to come out like that.
I'll do it in reverse order. Usually, the thing with sports writing is exactly what you said. Back in the day, you waited for the next morning's newspaper to know what happened to, let's say, a cricket match that was played in Calcutta, and I'm sitting in Chennai. Today, you can see it live. If you don't have the opportunity to see it live because you're trapped in this room, you can go back and see either the full match or the highlights on OTT platforms that are streaming it. Growing exposure to sport also makes you understand the sport better, so you probably know as much as a sports journalist. And yet, you can't just do away with the sports pages. So the challenge becomes, how do you write about something that everybody knows about and still make it relevant, still make it interesting, still hold. That piece is about 3,500 words, and I'm very grateful to you for saying kind things about it, because it was written, 7 years ago? 2017, if I remember right. It's Nozomi Okuhara versus PV Sindhu in Glasgow at the World Championship final. You also brought up the word cinematic, and because this is a workshop, a little bit of context. Back in the 50s and 60s, when television started becoming prevalent in the United States, what happened was that people started getting their news from television. So there was no reason to read in tomorrow's newspaper something that I had already learnt from either radio or television the previous evening during the news hour or whatever it was. Newspapers found that their relevance was declining. So then there was the usual heartburn, now what do we do kind of thing. And then they got to the point where they said, okay, what is it television can't do that we can do? Because we are print, we have the space. And they said, and that is how gradually over a period of about 5 to 6 years, narrative journalism or narrative non-fiction came into being. We call it long form, I don't agree with that. And I think it's also a bit of a problem because people just think that 4,000 words is long form. It's 4,000 good words. Yeah. But to get back to what I was saying, so now you want to create a new form. You don't have existing models. So where are you going to learn from? What the non-fiction writers of that time, and we're talking of people like Hunter Thompson, Norman Mailer, Ernest Hemingway, Tom Wolfe, Gay Tallies, people of that caliber, where did they learn from? They went to fiction and they went to the movies. And they learned from movies, which is why a lot of narrative non-fiction is exactly, I mean, I didn't invent this particular wheel. A lot of narrative non-fiction is very cinematic. You write in scenes. You use all the techniques of cinema. Actually, you use two different techniques. One is the techniques of cinema where you do cross-cutting. So in the Sindhu piece, for instance, there was if you've seen that match, there was a rally of 73 strokes. The second longest rally in badminton at the time, men's or women's. Which lasted for 1 minute and 27 seconds. It was breathtaking. So I thought if I wanted to convey what this match was, and it was a compelling match, I wanted to break that down into its component parts. There is this early exchanges where you're feeling each other out. At some point, somebody gets an advantage, pushes the other person to the back court and makes them run around. Then it changes hands. You somehow come out of that and you get the advantage. And then you have a sort of stalemate in the middle where both of you are trading strokes from mid-court. Neither of them is able to achieve the advantage, and so on and on. It builds. So I thought if I take each of these segments and write a little bit and use that as a cue, so you write a little bit about the opening and then you use that as the cue to write about the two contestants. They've been playing each other. Ironically, when they met, they had played each other, I think, 7 times. And if you tallied up all their scores, Okuhara won 4, Sindhu had won 3 at that time. If you tallied up all the scores, they had won the exact number of points. They were dead even. So I thought that provided some context. These guys are equals and they are fighting for a very, very crucial point. And then you cut back to the second stage of the rally, and you use that to talk about the styles of the two players. Okuhara is diminutive; she stays low to the ground. Sindhu, as you know, is tall. She has a huge leap. She's a creature of the air, really. So you could do that, and then you could cut back. It's what Tarantino does. The cross-cutting and the thing, right? It's a cinematic technique. The other thing that writers of that generation who started narrative writing, who brought to the table was, they learned from rhetoric. I think it was in 300 BC or so that, no, Aristotle was born in 300 odd BC. So somewhere between 300 and 384 when he passed away, he wrote a book called On Rhetoric, where what he had done was he had looked at the way the great speakers from the Greek canon, like Cicero, for instance, how they held the audience. And remember, they spoke for 2 days at a time. And you have to hold the audience throughout that period. And reduced it all to a series of rhetorical devices. What do we mean by that? Alliteration is a rhetorical device. The tricolon, use of threes. For some reason, threes are attractive. Remember Friends, Romans, and Countrymen. Remember Veni, Vidi, Vici. Remember liberty, equality, fraternity. Remember the famous definition of democracy: of the people, by the people, for the people. They all mean the same thing. But using those three, this thing builds a rhythm. And one of the things about writing is that though we read silently, these words make sounds in our head. So the more you use these kind of devices, the more your writing shines. So it's a combination of seeing things in scenes and using a lot of these rhetorical devices to create certain effects. Do you do that deliberately? No. Because, I mean, you can't start writing something and saying, okay, I'm going to put alliteration here. Because that is forced and it'll show. But once you imbibe these tools and you make it a part of your mental toolkit, it comes automatically. I've been trying to persuade Neha that I don't want to read from this, and
I
said,
will not be persuaded.
yeah. So she said that she won't ask the next question till I read. So I'm going to read a very short paragraph, and I'll use that to show you what I mean by some of the things that I was talking about, if I can find it, that is. Hang on. Excuse me a minute. Okay, so I'll read a bit from the midpoint of that rally. That is the point where both the players were in equipoise. Both of them were in the center of the court or thereabouts. They were trading shots. They were trying to get the other person out of position. And for that bit, this is what I wrote. A little past midpoint of that rally, each had run out of questions to ask the other. It's important to understand that sport, one-on-one sport, is gladiatorial. So somebody is asking a question, somebody is responding to it. For example, if you take cricket, the bowler bowls a googly and is asking, are you good enough to read it? Are you good enough to counter it? And the batsman is countering it. In badminton, you're putting a deep toss to the back, or in tennis for that matter, a deep toss or a backhand cross court or whatever. Are you good enough to reach it? Are you good enough to return it in such a way that I can't get to it? So it's always a question answer. It's always a call and response. So I talked about how they both tried everything and nothing was working. So a little past midpoint of that rally, each has run out of questions to ask the other. Now it is as if they have stopped being opponents and have come together as collaborators, cooperatively choreographing a ballet of skill and style and speed and grace and an almost superhuman endurance. As they push each other beyond known limits, as each finds in this moment of supreme trial the untapped extremes of their own ability, as impossible skill draws improbable retrieve, the ahs and the oohs from the crowd come so thick and fast that they merge into a ceaseless susurration. The point I wanted to make with this particular thing was, note what happens when you use both the skills together. One is creating scenes or conjuring up scenes so that as you're reading, you're seeing these two competitors breathless and still not giving up. You are seeing them trading shots of incredible skill. You're seeing them respond to every question the other one is asking. And then you use rhetorical devices. For example, come together as collaborators, cooperatively choreographing a ballet. Or where you have, the other trick is rhythm. It's like writing can also be like music. In fact, I love to write to blues, because there is something about the pentatonic scale that speaks to me, and I use those rhythms in my writing. So if you look at music, you will have these passages going like this, and then suddenly, if it's rock, you will suddenly have this drum roll that just soars. So sometimes you create sentences like that. You create that sentence like, and it's a very long sentence, as they push each other beyond known limits, as each finds in this moment of supreme trial the untapped extremes of their own ability, as impossible skill draws improbable retrieve, the ahs and oohs from the crowd come so thick and fast that they merge into a ceaseless susurration. You also end on another trick that great public speakers know, the use of sibilance. So ceaseless susurration, you're hearing it and it's like a wind blowing in your thing. So yeah, it's
It was such a good decision to force you to read, Prem, wasn't it? Yeah. So that was cinematic. It was also musical. It was like an audio visual experience. Yeah. So I want to ask you then, you spoke about intelligent readers or not taking the reader's intelligence for granted. But could you tell us a bit about our role as readers as well? And it's a diverse group of people, and that is always going to be a constant, isn't it? So we should also push for better better work to read and better words to read, right?
True enough that, look, this is a collaboration. I know that writing seems like a case of from one to many, but it's actually a dialogue. Even though there is no immediate feedback from the reader, there are ways in which the writer understands whether a book or a piece that you've written resonates or not. The most obvious one being sales, but sales are not an indication of anything. Some of the crappiest books produced in India have, sell in lakhs, and then some extremely good books sell. People celebrate if it sells 10,000 copies in a country of 1.4 billion. So that alone is not a measure, but there are ways in which you can support that. For example, I know a lot of writer friends who take a great delight in somebody posting on whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, saying, I just read this person's book and it was so good or whatever. You need that validation. You also need one other thing, and here we're not talking of books so much as, let's say, narrative nonfiction, reportage. We say that news and media houses, reporters are abdicating their responsibility. They are not digging deep enough into the questions that matter. They are not trying to answer the questions that are in our minds. They're not doing their fundamental role of speaking truth to power. We say all of this, and we believe this. It's not like nobody is doing it. There are sites that have identified niches that have not been well served, like, say, environment. Somebody from Pari Network is here. Here you are. What do they serve? They serve that section. It's again, mainstream media has abandoned that. They don't really write about the environment. Assam mein flood hua, so many acres were flooded, so many people lost their lives. While the rain is still pouring down, there will be a newspaper that says 200 crore ka nuksan hua. How do you know? I mean, the rain has to stop. Somebody has to do a proper assessment. So a lot of this is just off-the-top nonsense. But some of these sites, like Pari, for instance, or if you take Morning Context, which does deep dives into the world of tech and of business and all of that, they do excellent journalism. I mean, Hindenburg report has come out and everybody is like, why does it take a foreign short seller to talk about something that was very obvious? On the Morning Context, over the last 1 year, I remember reading at least 3 pieces questioning the business model of the Adani empire. So it's not that Indian media did not look at it, it is that we did not really back it. So what can you do as readers? My submission would be, if you see a site that is taking the pains to really report, to really dig deep, support them. No subscription model is, it's not going to break your bank. $50 a month. Let me ask you a hypothetical question. Suppose I promise you that every week I will do one long form piece. It might be about a game that really has a narrative, or it might be about a topic of current interest, or it might even be a historical piece, putting something today. For example, in the last 2 days, Siddiq Kapan has walked out of jail on bail. Today, Sharjeel Imam and others have been released for lack of evidence, and the court has said this is a cooked up conspiracy. What law were they arrested under? UAPA. We blame the current government for it, and we blame them rightly because they are the ones who put these people in jail. Where did UAPA come from? The Congress government. Yeah. So suppose I were to say that every week I will give you 4 pieces that will be thoughtful, it will be well researched, it will be written to the best of my ability, whatever that ability is. How many of you in this room would be willing to pay me $50 a month?
Everybody. That's great.
So, well, even if it's not everybody, even if it is a quarter of this audience, and if this audience, which is self-selected, is representative of the larger world outside, I don't need media to make a living. I can do the work I want to do, I can do it well, and you guys, for the price of a cup of coffee each, will help me pay my bills. As simple as that. So what can the reader do? Support good journalism. 3 words. Or put your money where your mouth is.
So support good journalism and also validate authors, right? Like try to create book communities, the way that the Vidarbha Lit Fest is trying to do.
Exactly.
My question now is a bit about history. You were with Yahoo, and you had this entire series called Originals,
Yeah.
which used the deep dive format, which is basically looking at an issue with depth and breadth. So wide but also deep, like not 10 millimeters deep, but hopefully more deep. And I think there was a piece every day that came out, right?
Every working day, yeah.
Every working day, which looked at an issue with a certain heft, right? And then it all ended. Tell us a bit about that and
Yeah,
how
so
it was also making that newsroom and getting that thing off the ground.
yeah, I'd rather not make this about myself. So I'll just talk contextually. For any media house, the challenge today is this. If you think back 15, 20 years ago, what you used to do in the morning, okay, some of us used to do in the morning, you guys don't even seem like you were doing anything in 20 years ago other than playing with your toys. But what some of us used to do was in the morning you wanted news, and we had a preferred news site, just like we have a preferred newspaper. So whatever it was, the Hindu.com, IndianExpress.com, whatever, we keyed in the URL and we went to the front page and we read the news. You know what? The number of people, and this is true for all mainstream media, the number of people who key in a URL and go to a traditional legacy media house site directly is in single digits today. Less than 10 out of 100 people even. Okay, who in this room has used a URL to go to a mainstream site in the last 1 week? Anybody?
Me,
1, 2, 3.
moderator.
And by the way, you shouldn't raise your hand if you've gone to your own site. Okay, 5 people. What about 40 odd people in this room? That's exactly what I said, single digits. People now find their news sources elsewhere. And that is causing like a whole lot of change in how the news ecosystem works. And you wanted a specific response to a specific question. And I went off into generalization about this, but I'll get to the point. The point is, I need to find a way, if my site is to succeed, I need to find a way to make you come to my site. So I need to make you do yahoo.com, which means I have to offer you something which is not the same as the offering of everybody else. That is when we came up with the concept of originals. We said we will do what it takes. We will send people out into the field for as long as it takes. And since Neha is sitting next to me, a subject close to Neha's heart, poaching in Kaziranga. Every other month or so, you find stories about a rhino having been killed for its horn and stuff like that. And we were sitting around the table talking about this, wondering how to cover it. And what actually ended up happening was, and I'm particularly proud of this, a young girl volunteered to go to Kaziranga, to go with the wildlife officials who go into the interior and stay in a hut for a week, living on whatever they can carry, to understand what their life was. Because what is the problem with poaching? Vast area, few people. You can't cover it all. So we wanted to understand what is it to be a wildlife guardian or a wildlife official. And she took 7 days, I think, 8 days in the field and came back and wrote a spectacular piece that won a Red Ink Award for wildlife and environment reporting. Every one of our pieces was like that. People went into the field, we paid whatever it took, and we paid better than industry wage, because this kind of writing is an effort. We think that people who put in that effort deserve to be properly compensated for that effort. And we had one story a day. What it means to produce one story a day is that you have to keep in mind that not every story will mature perfectly on deadline. Something can go wrong. If not anything else, the writer will miss a flight and that's it. That story is gone. So you actually have to work on at least 3 stories. So if you're doing 5 stories a week, you're actually working 15 stories. And that's a humongous task for, there were 3 of us editors. It was great while it lasted. And what did happen was that, if you want to reduce it to numbers, January 2010, when some of us, Arun Tadanki, the MD, me as managing editor, and a few others, all joined Yahoo, the brief given to us was make Yahoo a content destination. At that time, we were doing 170 million page views on media properties, that is content. November of 2010, we were doing 1.4 billion, which at that time was greater than the next 3 sites in India put together. And a lot of it was because of this quality content. So, yeah, I think, my decision to quit Yahoo was when they pulled the budget for that. But it is good while it lasted, and hopefully.
And in some ways, there are so many sites today that are trying the deep dive or the long format or the narrative nonfiction. You have Goya Journal, you have 52.
Yes.
Even Kodai Chronicle, which is a personal favorite of mine. Do check these sites out. And as he says, it's also our responsibility as a reader to ask for better and to patronize the ones that are better. And I'd love to open the floor out for questions. I'm sure you have many questions for Prem.
Hang on. No, sorry. So I'm taking the festival director's privilege here. And this is Prem just said one line briefly, as modestly he could say it, that I'll not make it about myself. If you want that Prem makes it about himself and he is politically incorrect, unplugged, unscripted. If you want that, and this is totally, so far I have done whatever I had wanted with this festival. But now, if you want to shape this festival, 2 to 3 p.m. we have a slot and a hall open, Banyan Hall, 2 to 3 p.m. Now, what you need to do with your applause or raise of hand, you have to confirm if you want to do that AM and Unplug with both of them in 2 to 3 p.m. slot. I've checked their schedules, it allows them. Now it's up to you to persuade them if you want. Otherwise, this Q&A ends in 7 minutes. Please, your choice.
Sure. Happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Super.
It's Prem, please, not sir.
Okay. This is a question I'm asking on behalf of my son who's into his final year of journalism. He wants me to put this question to you specifically, that in this age of distraction, how does a wannabe journalist balance content with sensationalism?
You don't. It's a simple answer. In the first place, I wish your son all the very best. And I hope you'll tell him, say as advice from an elder brother, that sensationalism has a short shelf life. It doesn't get you any place. Let me ask you one thing. When the internet was, exploding, a lot of sites were doing what mainstream media normally does. And then you started having sites come up like BuzzFeed. What is BuzzFeed? Sensationalism, listicles. Where is BuzzFeed today? But the legacy houses are still around. New York Times is still profitable. The Washington Post is still profitable. Sensationalism lasts for a very brief period of time, and it cannot, if you want to be practical about it, you cannot monetize sensationalism. Right? So you don't balance good journalism with sensationalism. You say that those people who want to thrive for a limited period of time with sensationalism, leave them to their devices. But if you want to have a sustained career in journalism, train yourself to do proper journalism.
Let's move to the next question
Hi,
really
Prem.
fast because
This is KK here, your ex-colleague from
Hi,
Native.
how are you doing?
Awesome, thank you very much. My question is, if you really look around, from full course meal, we went to QSR, quick service restaurant or fast food.
Mm-hmm.
From movies, we went to short videos. From long forms, we went to 160 characters. So over a period of time, as as a society, are we getting programmed, quote unquote, for a short time dopamine indulgence, number one? And where do you see this trend? Because youngsters, and I did a small experiment on myself, I started watching short videos, and over a week I got addicted to short videos and I had to extricate myself out of it, right? But the whole society, the whole youngsters are getting, let's say, addicted to this short form overall. So how do you read this and what are the implications of this? Thank you very much.
My first question to you would be, what choices are you giving them? You're flooding them with 160 or 240 character tweets and short form videos and TikTok, and that is before it got banned, but whatever. So when we say they're getting addicted, you're feeding the addiction. Try giving them books. I mean, it's not like movies didn't exist in my time. It is that my parents thought that it was necessary for their son and their daughter, my sister, who's equally a voracious reader, to actually consume good literature. They went out of their way, even with their limited funds, to make sure that it was available to us. So if you have a young kid growing up, fine, that kid is going to find short form video and is going to enjoy it, and I don't blame you for enjoying it. There are times when my head is overfull and I really can't process serious stuff. And I'll go and just watch one of these snacky videos or whatever. There is something called the Dodo, which has this little dog, puppy playing with a kitten, that kind of thing.
My favorite as well.
Yeah, exactly. Pandas running around and tumbling around and all of that, and I'll watch that. My point is that can't be my only diet. So, if you are in that position where you are in a guardianship role or a mentorship role to a young kid, what I would suggest is, let him or her enjoy snack food, but also make sure that there is proper nutrition on the table. It's as simple as that.
Can we take one last question? Because he had his hand up, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Prem. I have a question in terms of let me put it in an abstract manner. We used to call it as discourse ethics, that there has to be a discourse ethics within the community to have a democratic way of understanding things, as well as, in a way, a civilized way of knowing and letting know things, right? So when we talk about that, right, we also have a responsibility in terms of how these spaces are represented in a way. Say, for example, the media houses themselves are flooded with the kind of the so-called savarnas, the upper castes, which are there. There is very less representation of those stories as well as people particularly into these media houses. So what are we talking in terms of democratization and discourse ethics? Secondly, as has been said, there is this another layer to it. This is what is called as consumerism brought in by the market economy, right? Wherein we have moved from the shortest form. Probably we might next have a very coded kind of a language whereby we are going to one-liners, right? So having said this, can we stop consumerism and on the other hand, still expect that there has to be a market economy governing our lives? Right? So we have accepted the market logic on the one hand, and we reject the whole idea of being governed by their policies. So how does we resolve these contradictions that is already there within the reading, writing kind of a framework?
Yeah, the problem is that I've been told that I have exactly 1 minute and your question calls for me to talk for a minimum of 1 hour. Yeah, if you'd like, you can come over to the AMA and we can discuss this threadbare. A very short answer would be, stop trying to turn the tide. King Canute tried and failed. You cannot push the tide back. You cannot say go away. Consumerism is here to stay. Short form content or snacky content, all of that is here to stay. The dominance of certain societal groups or caste groups or whatever in certain sections of society is here to stay. It is eroding, but it is eroding at a very glacial pace. In fact, the Himalayan glaciers are melting faster than some of our inborn prejudices. Yeah, so, yeah, thank you. No, seriously, they are, the glaciers are melting. But I think all we can do is keep these conversations alive. Like they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You brought up the thing about the savarnas and all that. Now, one of the things that I have seen in the last 10 years is there is an increase in the volume, the content, the tenor, and the passion coming from Dalit voices, which never used to exist before. It's a brilliant thing because they have been voiceless, now they are finding their voice. It's early days, but we have started something that nobody can stop. So, yeah, hopefully a little bit at a time. You give it a push when you can, I'll give it a push when I can. And hopefully we're all pushing in the same direction so that the damn thing doesn't, Yeah. But thank you all. It's been you guys have been a wonderful audience. I've forgotten which room Pawan said. I think he said between 2 and 3. Banyan. So if you just want to have a random conversation which can include politics or sport or, politics.
Your
Yeah.
ideas on ideal writing, sir, are imbued by eager readers who cover up every space of this hall. We resonate deep gratitude to you, sir, for being here. A big round of applause for Mr. Prem Panicker. I now request an artist. Sir, just a second, sir. We would like to present a handmade painting. It has been personalized for the author, Mr. Prem Panicker, by the artist Anjum Altaf. It has been painted, it has been customized for Mr. Prem Panicker by Alag Angle. We are proud to be associated with such talent at Alag Angle. And I request the moderator to hand over the gift back to Mr. Prem Panicker too, and then usher him back to the audience. Thank you.